Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of TCG Talk, back today with another video. And in today's video, we're going to be talking about where I think Katsu sits in the meta in terms of what decks he's good into, what decks he's bad into, just give my personal takes on some things and generate some discussion with you all. I'd love to hear it, and we'll just kind of talk about it. Hopefully it gives you a better idea of like what you're good and bad into, and if you want to play the hero or not, competitively at least. But if you're new to the channel, welcome. Thank you so much for stopping by. Hopefully you enjoy your stay. If you're a long-standing supporter, thank you so much as always. It is again late at night, so we are in smooth jazz mode when it comes to the voice, so if you have to turn me up, I apologize. I try to do it in post-editing and turn my voice up, that way you don't have to worry about it, but if I am a little bit low, I apologize. Regardless, thank you so much for stopping by, regardless if you're new to the channel or not. So Katsu right now, with the Bonds of Ancestry edition or re-edition, right? It doesn't make Katsu like a top tier deck, in my opinion. It doesn't even make him probably the best aggro deck in the format. I think Syndra still is probably better as a whole, better into fatigue, has a better kind of, anti-fatigue strategy, and can play around the heavy defense reactions a little bit better than Katsu can, because Syndra doesn't really require on hits when she does her setup plan. All that to say, I think Katsu's a little bit better into assassins and a little bit better into some of the mid-rangey heroes as a whole. Not a ton, but gets some brownie points. The one thing that we have to think about is these are, and that also as a preface to this video, these are just my takes. I've played against pretty much every hero in the game as Katsu. Now, playing against them with both Retrace and Bonds in the deck, I haven't played against every single hero yet, but I've already played against a good amount. It's been like no life unit the last day and a half, the last day now. And the deck is definitely a little bit fundamentally different. It doesn't have the loop capability that it did back in the heavy hitters meta when we had like 6 Bonds in the deck. But it does have the ability to blend lines with Retrace the Past and Bonds of Ancestry together to be able to go like Descendant into Retrace, naming Surging, into Whelming, into Bonds, into something else. Like, you can do these crazy cool lines that really punish your opponent, especially if you just have a natural combo line. We also don't have Art of Wars, that changes things too. All that to say, we'll get right into this. So we have heavily favored, slightly favored, even, slightly unfavored, heavily unfavored, and skill check. I'll talk about the outer edges first. Heavily favored, there's not many in the game. I think the only heavily favored decks are Max and Teklo, just because they're both abysmal right now. I think you do very well into both those decks without pretty much any trouble. Maybe a Fatigue Teklo could give you some trouble, but the deck, I'm not going to count parts of archetypes in heroes that aren't real, if that makes sense. Like, for example, Tree Frog Dash is really bad for Katsu, but I think with CYB gone, Tree Frog Dash just can't really exist. That's just my opinion. We'll see. But these two decks, I think Katsu is very, very good into, like 60-40-ish or better. The skill check is the most interesting one. I created this category because both of these heroes fundamentally are kind of even for Katsu, but Dorinthia and Prism are two heroes that when you first play against them as Katsu, it feels awful. Like, you just getting your ass kicked. Once you understand, and they both have high roll potential where it doesn't really matter how much you understand the matchup, they both can just draw the nuts and just kill you. That's kind of the nature of both of these heroes into this matchup specifically. But regardless of that, they're two heroes that once you understand how they work, what they're trying to achieve, how many cards are in their hand, what could they possibly still have, based off how they blocked, what do you think is in their hand? Once you understand, like, Dorinthia's Reprise, what's left in her deck, how can she hurt you if she blocks versus doesn't block, if you block versus don't block, or how many cards she kept in her hand and what that could mean based off what's in her grave. And then with Prism, keeping her off soul just long enough to buy time and understanding, like, okay, if she pitches this certain card and plays this certain card after not blocking at all, what does that mean? If she's on a 3-card hand, what does that mean? Like, all these little micro decisions that you kind of just learn from playing against the heroes. These matchups go from what you would feel like is like in this category to at the top of slightly unfavored to even. They're both two extremely skill check matchups. I just wanted to bring those up. This is kind of how it is. And if anyone ever wants me to go more in depth on matchups, let me know. I can at least give my macro thoughts on matchups. When it comes to the slightly favored category, Arachne Huntsman, in my opinion, slightly favored if you know what you're doing. Huntsman's just kind of the weaker assassin, doesn't have as much go again, really has to draw its perfect disruption to beat you. Even if it's on the fatigue game plan, you can kind of push through, especially with Bonds of Ancestry and Mask of the Pouncing Lynx. If you draw the natty combo line, there's not much they can do, and you eventually just push through. They can't fatigue you if you don't draw what you need to, and they keep that disruption going, but I think overall it's on the Arachne to stop you rather than you stopping the Arachne. Bolton is another example of I'm only going to entertain versions of the deck that are real. If you're playing against a Sabres Bolton, it is unfavored. If this is Sabres Bolton, it probably goes down to here. But sadly, Sabres Bolton is not real. It hasn't been real for a while. Any Bolton players in the comments, please tell me different. I just haven't seen a Sabres Bolton since the Calling Dallas, which was like, what set was that? Uprising. I haven't even seen a Sabres Bolton, so definitely if they're on the rating game plan, unless they just really hot draw their Luminas, this is favored for you. It's really hard for Bolton to keep up, in my opinion, especially if you side out like 3 cards and put in some flick flacks, and kind of like just value them out when you can. I think it's pretty favored. Dash is the same thing. If it's like a super hyper tree frog dash, then it becomes like down here, I'd say. But the current versions of Dash without CYB that are probably err a little bit on the defensive end, but not insane, I think it's still slightly favored for Katsu with Bonds. People might argue this, but that's just my opinion. Phi, at the end of the day, the die roll matters a lot in Ninja. You could argue that it's like this. But when I talk about Ninja mirrors, I always say, in a fair game where neither one of them high rolls, who wins more consistently? Katsu beats Phi more consistently. In a game where neither one of them high rolls. Now, it's the Ninja mirror. So if one of them high rolls and one low rolls, that's just how the game goes. But in a even game, Katsu is favored, in my opinion. Kano, especially if you have AB3, like I have AB3 in the sideboard. Maybe even Oasis or 2 if you really have a good Kano in your area. I think it's really good for Katsu. You can really pressure Kano really quickly. Also, depending on how you hold cards in hand, Bonds being a 0 for 8 in the late game, which late game in this matchup is like turn 3, you can basically threaten their life total and threaten more damage without expending cards, like additional cards from hand, which is really bad for the Kano. It's on the Kano to find their combo quickly, to not die. Levia without Art of War, even though it hurts both of us, I think Katsu's just a little bit better. Now, this can get a little skill checky. If the Levia really knows how to manage their grave well, you kind of fall into the just push damage and get flesh bagged at the wrong time. You could end up being in a bad spot, but I think all things equal, if both players understand the matchup, I think it's favored for Katsu. Acilio is really fun. I love playing Acilio. If Acilio does the thing, then Acilio can win. Obviously, Acilio is very much a combo deck. If it hits the nuts, it can just kill you, but there's also turns where it'll draw 3 instants and you deal 25 to it, and then the next turn you just kill it or something. So like, it's on the Acilio to really draw the right hands and find its combo quickly. If it doesn't, it's similar to Kano, but even more fragile, where they need to find what they need to find quickly to beat you. I think it's on them to win more than you. Same thing with Rhinar. I've always felt favored in a Rhinar. There are certain Rhinar aficionados with club builds that are more defensive that can do really well into you, but those decks sadly aren't as real. And if they don't see their Blood Rush bellows early, and you can also, if you can kind of force their flesh bag out quickly, the key to Rhinar and Levia is forcing their flesh bag out without giving up too much value. Like basically present a line where it's like, okay, I have to flesh back here because this is the most high value time, but it's also early in the game, so it gives you a little bit more edge for later. That's where that is. For the even categories, it's a lot of the aggro matchups. So like Syndra, Dio, and Fang are very contingent on like who high rolls. But even in a, like I said, for Phi, in an even fair game where neither side high rolls like a mofo, it truly is pretty much even. Like both in the Syndra matchup, in the Dio matchup, and in the Fang matchup, it usually comes down to like who gets slightly, if no one high rolls, it's like who gets that last couple points of value on their offensive turns a little bit better. Pouncing Lynx and Retrace the Past really helps in the Fang matchup a lot. The Dio and Syndra matchups are truly like who wins the die roll and sees the cards they need to see faster. Betsy, I put as even. It's a Guardian. If it's a really slow build, it could give you trouble, but Betsy's just not real. So until then, I'm just going to say even. Verdance is very interesting. Verdance, I feel, should give you problems, but she doesn't. I don't know. I haven't had much trouble like pushing past a defensive Verdance that's trying to play for late game. They really have to see their Felling of the Crowns at the right time and really disrupt you. There's some keynotes with Verdance too about I usually stay off of an Arsenal because Plow Under and stuff like that. I usually don't, allow myself to, or it's similar to Assassin where I try not to allow myself to get disrupted. I just push damage, and most of the time it's enough. But I do put even because a really skilled Verdance pilot, I think this is very much pilot dependent. Whoever is the better pilot with their deck and understands the matchup better typically wins, in my opinion. That's just me. And we've had a couple of Verdances local, so I have gotten to try that matchup a couple times, which has been nice. Then we get to the slightly unfavored category. Jarl's probably going to be the biggest head scratcher here. The reason I think Jarl is only slightly unfavored is against Jarl, you just don't pop equipment until you absolutely have to, like in game where you're trying to kill them. You run, because of Retrace the Past, I think a lot of Katsu lists right now are going to be on like 17 to 20 blues. And I think that helps you push back on some of their initial attacks. Now, if they break an equipment super early with like, a Frozen to Death or something, then they can change the course of the game. But if you can keep your equipment up, this matchup's not really that bad. It is slightly unfavored still, but it's not like Icelander felt where it was just abysmal. They really have to because they can't push as much damage. At least the current builds right now, they're like heavy ice, and if they're not hitting their Oakenolds or like, a pummeled, CNC or Spinal Crush or something, if they run Spinal Crush, it really hurts them. You just have to be really disciplined with your equipment. Marionette, I would say, is slightly unfavored. Now, if Marionette went to a more disruptive game plan, with more on hits, like true on hits, then it would go down to here. But right now, the successful Marionette builds are on the Dagger plan. And because of that, it becomes more of a race, right? Like, they still have Codex, they still have Mark of the Black Widow, they still have Leave No Witnesses, of course. But, like, overall, a lot of their attacks are just pure damage, a good amount. It's still a slightly unfavored for sure. But this matchup turns into more of an aggro match, less so than a true assassin matchup. And I just realized I don't have Uziri on here for whatever reason. So someone's probably already commented on that. But Uziri would be probably in the same tier as well. I just haven't played against Uziri so long. I don't know why it's not on here. It should have been. Sorry, Kidder Fox, if you watch this. I apologize, Colin. But yeah, Marionette and Uziri would kind of be right here. Marionette because it's more of an aggro matchup, less so than disruptive. Uziri, if you're running into an Uziri and your sideboard isn't prepped for it, right? Like, you're not like respecting Assassin, so to speak, with like a lot of defense reactions, reinforced lines, stuff like that, then Uziri would be like down here, right? But if you're prepped a little bit more and you have practice in the matchup, I think it's just slightly unfavored. But someone could argue it's heavily unfavored down with New. Azalea, this matchup, if Azalea does the thing, it's miserable, obviously. But if you do the thing, you can just kill her, especially if she runs into some inconsistency issues. Again, I approach evaluating this matchup like I do the Ninja Mirrors, where it's like, okay, if neither deck high rolls and they're both doing their thing, who wins more times than not? Azalea is going to win more times than not because of the disruption with Red in the Ledger, because of the additional value with Remorseless, stuff like that. But overall, you can also just kill this opponent. Ira, this matchup's really, really fun, actually. I've played both sides of this matchup a lot, and I think Ira just edges it out a little bit. Ira can do some really funny things and actually race you decently, especially if they're on like a mid-range game plan, because you really don't want to block anything she's doing. But she can just do weird plays where it's like Kadachi for 1, Bittering for 5, Torrent for 5 or 6 on hit mask, and then hit you with something else and like actually like race you down because she's dealing like 10 to 15 damage a turn alongside blocking you pretty effectively. So it is kind of unfavored. KO is really hard because KO has so much armor with like, yes, other brutes have the same armor technically, but KO can just utilize his armor so much better while staying more mid-rangey and can just mid-range you out. You have to, like, it's very similar to like how old school Bravo felt, where like you need to force their armor out as quickly as humanly possible, without taking too much of a value hit on your turn cycle. But it doesn't feel great. Olympia, if they're on like a decimator fatigue build, it's definitely down here for sure, but the deck's just not real enough. So if they're running like some type of like semi mid-range build, then it's just slightly unfavored. But honestly, you could argue that it's just down here because the only realistic build you're probably ever going to see that, if someone's being serious, is probably like a decimator, like slower build. That's just my opinion. I've legitimately only played against Olympia on Talishar, because I've just never seen that deck in real life. So then Vincent is slightly unfavored for sure. It's not heavily unfavored. The Link's plan with Retrace the Pass allows you to keep up with them a little bit more. But if they chain the disruption together and, you know, stack the rune chance, it can get bad really quick. You really don't want to block, but it does help a little bit more in this current list because you have, like I said, 17, in my opinion, most successful lists will probably be in like 17 to 20 blues. So you can pitch those rune chants a little bit easier. If you have Warmonger's Diplomacy in the list also, that'll help a lot as well. So if you have a lot of Incent in your area, maybe you just have that in your blue base. But overall, in an even game, it's pretty slightly unfavored. Then we have the heavily unfavored. The key ones that you have to worry about from a meta perspective are these three right here, maybe Victor. Florian's heavily unfavored, and when I say heavily unfavored, I'd say like 40-60 if you know the matchup and feel good about it. We'll see how Florians are going to have to go back to more of a mid-range, maybe even more aggressive game plan. So we'll see how that affects the matchup, but it doesn't feel great. It's like a 40-60 because it feels very similar to how Bravo felt, where like you can win if you play perfectly and, you know, maybe they stumble one turn or something, but if they present what they're presenting consistently, it's really hard to win. Same thing with Rat and he slipped through the cracks. The onus is on you to figure out how to push back against their disruption. It gets really difficult. Their go-agains, like even stuff like Aura Desire Body is something as simple as that. It can be really frustrating because you kind of have to block it because they gain a life and draw a card, and then they can mark and then mark the Black Widow, and they can just legitimately race you. So you have to be really careful on that one. New feels bad, but New's going to be gone by week 2 of Nats, so it's not too big of an issue. Guardian's always bad. Nothing really much to say about this. You can get a lot of brownie points in these. If you're running Mask of the Pouncing Links, you understand the matchup very well and have some sideboard tech for it, like a movable or reinforced line, stuff like that. If Guardian ever comes back in the Mastery Pack, there's some tools you can put in to make it better, but overall it doesn't feel great. Kasai has always been a natural counter to Ninja. Without the ability to loop Bonds of Ancestry, it feels pretty bad. Same thing with Riptide. And then we had talked about Olympia. So this is where I have it. Like I said, Uziri is not on here. I apologize. I don't know why she's not in this tier list. I'll add her after this video. Someone's already commented down below and said, where's Uziri? Before I got to that point, but it is what it is. But yeah, overall Katsu, in my opinion, is like a solid B tier hero. It's like a mid to high B tier that if you run into the right matchups, at even a bigger event, you could do really well, right? Like if you have matchups where you run into, you know, like if I just take off the skill check thing here for a second, like if your matchups ended up being something like this, where it's like Syndra round 1, and then, you know, you face against, you know, you get like one random one-off matchup here, maybe you play, you know, like a Verdance, and then you end up, you know, playing some type of skill check or like a slightly unfavored here like Azalea, but they don't high roll you as bad. You know what I'm saying? Like you get these matchups like this where Katsu could steal like a matchup spread like this, right? But if you get a matchup spread where it's like this, where you're just sitting there with like Florian, then Victor, then a New, then a Slippy, and then maybe you get unlucky and run into a Riptide, or maybe even it's like a Vincent or something like that, then it gets a little bit rough, right? So it all depends. But overall, Katsu's in a competitive spot is the best way to look at it. I think that's fair to say. If I saw someone flip this hero over, like objectively, regardless of my love for the hero, if I saw someone flip over Katsu on stream at like a Battle Hardened, I'd be like, oh, okay, sick. Like this person just isn't playing a random deck they love. That they probably actually have a competitive reason to play it. So all that to say, I'm excited to see where it goes. Give me your thoughts. If you completely disagree with the matchup on here, that's completely fine. These are just from my experiences, and I'm totally okay with someone disagreeing with it. We will just agree to disagree on it, right? Pilot skill in Katsu is extremely difficult. It's even more difficult now with Retrace the Pass and Bonds. There are so many play lines, and they differ depending on who you're playing and what hurts that hero the most and how you do that. So I'm still learning every time, right? Playing with Bonds and Retrace the Pass together, which is we haven't done before, is very difficult. It changes the thought process of a lot of play lines in the deck. So all that to say. But yeah, let me know what your thoughts are. I don't think this is properly. I'll put it back so you can screenshot it properly. I think this is where we were at. Acilio is in slightly favored, so is Kano. I think we're pretty much good. The skill check was down here. Yeah, I think that's kind of how we had it. But yeah, let me know what your thoughts are. Love to hear it. Thank y'all so much for tuning in. Please leave a like, comment, subscribe if you like this type of content. And if not, go down below to the creator worksheet. I will be working this week to put in some Alpha Clash and Grand Archive creators on separate tabs so we can get different games going. But definitely give some other creators a follow, and I'll see y'all next time on TCG Talk. Thank y'all so much.